This trip I'm going to tell you about, all four of us that went on this, over the years, we've heard a lot of people come up to us and say, I was going to do something wild when I was young, but never did. There's always this long pause, and you see they're trying to figure out why they never went. And so this is just one adventure that's out there. All right, well, we'll start off telling you where everybody's from. We all grew up in Iowa. I'm from LaPorte City, which is about there. The other three guys grew up in Remsen, which is about here. We started somewhere about here in Minnesota and ended up there. Total distance about 1,400 miles. This whole thing started on this lake. This is near Pelican Rapids. And Hank Kohler, one of the guys from Northwest Iowa, was just a little kid. He's up there fishing with his dad on this lake. And just to pass the time, his dad said, "Hey, you know where this water goes?" And Hank's a good Iowan. To us there is no other river than the Mississippi. And so he said, "Well, yeah, it goes to the Gulf." And his dad said, "No, this water goes north." And so that's the day the dream was born. So Hank's on one side of the state growing up, I'm on the other. That's my first canoe there. My dad built that for us. That's my two brothers. This is one of the canoes we took back when it was new. That's a 1966 Chrysler, 1966 Dad. And Dad did take us to the Boundary Waters here once when we were kids. Just for a little 4 or 5 day trip, and yeah, that's us. And yes, they dressed us that way. It's amazing we didn't get beat up every day in school.
Nice garbage bag.
Yeah, we had some high-tech gear, as you can see. And then I went again when I was about 17. Another couple other buddies and I came up here, and we did another about 4 or 5 day trip. That was pretty much the extent of any of our wilderness or camping experience. The other three guys hadn't even done that. I met up with Hank when I was going to school. I was going to Iowa State and working at this pizza parlor. And one night in the kitchen, Hank starts telling me about this plan of his. And, the sane people kind of backed away from him a little bit. And I thought, well, this sounds like fun. And so a year later, it was Hank, his brother Keith, and a friend of theirs by the name of Rich Whipke, and I, we headed out. Now we started near Fergus Falls, and on the Otter Tail River, and this is day one, May 8th, 1979.
Whoa.
Yeah, if I was going to do it again, I'd wait. It get cold up there. Man, we didn't know this. Guys had only been out like 4 days. We froze that first couple of days.
So before you go on, is that a 15-foot square stern you're paddling, or a 17-foot?
It's 17 foot. 17 foot, and and yes, this is what we used. I mean, we were college students. We didn't have a lot of money. And so Hank bought that at a garage sale. And if you look closely, you see these little stars and this red here, and you can kind of see a blue stripe along there. The previous owner of that canoe thought so highly of it, he painted it red, white, and blue and used it as a float in the parade. That's the quality of the gear we were going after.
There's still ice on the shore.
Oh, it was cold.
Yeah.
It was cold.
We're
on the Otter Tail River to start with, and it's actually a very pretty little river. It has about a half a dozen of these little dams on there, and these are hydro dams. They actually generate electricity here. And Rich and I had some fun below one of these. Nice curvy little stream, and we're just screaming through, and we're having a riot. Came around a corner, and there's a tree laying 3/4 of the way down, across. There's a little gap on the right. And we're like, well, we can make that gap. Well, it's not a good story if we do. So, of course, we didn't. We hit that tree broadside, and what it did is it catches you in the shoulders, throws you in the upstream side, and then it drives you down. And it pinned us underwater against that tree. And I got to tell you, you don't know how powerful that water is until you're trying to come back up against it. And we couldn't. But we got lucky. The canoe flipped into the current, and it filled with water. And that created enough pressure that it pushed some of these branches out of the way and made a hole. And it took us with it. So that's day 3. I was ready to go home. Hank had promised me fun. And so far I haven't seen a whole lot of that. Yeah, it snowed on us the next morning just to kick us. The sun did finally come out, so we took a picture of it. We spent about 5 days moving to the southwest, over to the North Dakota-Minnesota border. And by the time you get there, you're in farm country. And, that's Hank in the front, by the way. That's his brother Keith in the back. He's 6'9". So he had to be in the back. We tried him in the front once, but he's like this. What else can I tell you? This is day one on the Red River. See how happy everybody is? There's day 7. And that's why. You can paddle on that river for half an hour and be farther south than when you started. You know, you get to a spot like right here, and the water's like right over there. You know it's there. And you know it's going to take you forever to get there. There's food in town. I'm just going to tell you, I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but this night got out of control. Ended up at some farmer's hayloft till 5 a.m. Yeah, playing basketball. We'll just leave it at that. This is the first indication that we'd had some water had flowed through here. And this was the second. That's a bale of hay. That's how high the water was about a month before we came through. And a quarter mile upstream from this, there was a cow in the tree at that height. But it was all rotted and gross, and so we didn't take a picture of that. You know, I got to tell you, I've seen floods before, but it's really different being on that water and looking up and seeing stuff hanging in the trees. It gives you a real different perspective of what a flood is all about. And the 79 flood actually was one of the biggest in history. Up until the 97 flood, it was the biggest on many parts of the Red. This is an interesting spot. Well, first of all, you can see some more of our fine gear. I think Hank bought that tent at Penny's. That's where you go for the good stuff, right, Steve? You know. You can see we've already duct taped plastic to that to try to keep it from leaking. But this was an interesting spot because there were 5 little houses out in the country there, and we always stopped to see if we could camp, and never turned down once. The folks along the Red River were great. And we went from house to house, and nobody's home. But we could look at the basements, and they're still full of water. And we got to that last house, and we could look into the kitchen, and there's still cornflakes on the table. So when the flood came, these people just left and hadn't been back yet. It's kind of spooky staying there, actually. Here we are at Pembina, North Dakota. We're right on the border now. The flood had gone down a little bit during the night, so we had to walk through the muck. That's Red River mud. I cannot describe this stuff to you. There's a gentleman who lives along the Red. He can explain. Yeah, he can tell you about this. This is just the nastiest goo you will ever walk in.
They call it tiger poop.
Met some girls here who lied about their ages. Found that out 2 years ago. Told us they were 18, but they weren't. Nobody's going to jail. We're okay. We didn't know how much alcohol you could take into Canada. So this seemed to be the easiest way to remedy that problem. We didn't want to get into trouble.
Drink it quick.
The border crossing was interesting. I won't get into that, but it was a lot of fun. Let's just say they aren't used to people walking up from the river. This is our first night in Canada. And this turned out to be one of the best stops the whole trip. We pulled up to this farm. There was a young guy there about our age, and he's like, yeah, you can camp here. And he came down a little bit later and said, hey, you guys want to go to a social? And we're like, well, I don't know, what's a social? And he said, it's a party, you'll like it. And what it turned out to be is what they call a wedding social. It's a party they have for a couple that's getting married. They have it before they get married. It's to raise money for them. You give them money. And he took us there, and we met this group of friends of his, and they were just this really close-knit bunch. And we had such a good time that we stayed another day, went to a park, played basketball for an afternoon. A couple dozen people here. Well, it's sort of basketball. They don't really differentiate between hockey and basketball. It's a rough game. This is Diney here. This is the kid whose farm we were at. And I went back to Manitoba last summer for the first time in 30 years. And he owns that farm now. And I spent 5 days with him and his family. And we had another party, and about 20 of these people showed up. It was just like being there, just the greatest folks. So that's pretty much our first 3 weeks. We're in civilization. We're having a lot of fun with people along the river. Now things are going to change. We've got Lake Winnipeg there, which is 300 miles long. Cold when we came through. The water temperature was such that you'd maybe last about 10, 15 minutes, then you'd be incoherent. Very temperamental. Then there's another 400 miles that come from here over to this lake and then up to York Factory. And there's a village here, and there's a village here, and then that's it. Other than that, it's pretty much pure wilderness. Southern shore Lake Winnipeg is very, very pretty. Lots of rock and forest. We couldn't believe our luck. Lake Winnipeg can sock you in for a week at a time, and you're going nowhere. But this is what it did the first evening for us. And so we kept paddling. And kept paddling. Now that's midnight. But we weren't done. We'd come to this long point, and we could either spend all day going 34 miles down into this bay, or we could make a 6-mile jump across. And we decided to make that jump at night. And our reasoning at the time was, well, the wind won't come up at night. Which, yeah, I heard somebody laugh, and it's like, yeah, no, it can come up anytime. But it didn't. And we made it across, and we were pretty proud of ourselves. This is a real mild day on Lake Winnipeg. People always ask us, well, what are these goofy white things? Well, we're from Iowa. So, you know, we've never seen big water like this, and so we were afraid of it. So with our limited money supply, we bought those outriggers. We thought, well, that'll save us. God, they're worthless. I'm sorry. Hank did the dishes once. Eastern Shore is very rocky. We almost died the day after this. We were getting pretty cocky on Lake Winnipeg. We're cutting bays and everything's going fine. But on the day I'm talking about here, we just had to make about a 3-mile jump. And it's a beautiful sunny day. Wind's blowing maybe 5 miles an hour. We got halfway across, and we heard this whooshing noise. And we're like, what is that? And it kept getting louder. And then you can see the surface of the water turn dark blue. And it's the wind. And you can see it, and you can hear it coming. I've never seen anything like it in my life. The wind went from 5 to 25, 30 miles an hour in 3 minutes, just like that. Waves picked up quick and started breaking over. And that was a tight spot. Because if we'd gone in and drank there, we'd have probably frozen before we could have made it to shore. And the other canoe wouldn't have been any help because they were busy trying to stay afloat themselves. But we managed to fight our way over to the lee of that island and get out of the wind. We were a little more careful after that. Not a lot. June 13th, found some snow, so we had to play in it. This was a big day for me because I envisioned my friends back in Iowa in a hot, sticky soybean field pulling weeds. I'm like, yeah, this is tough life. About 2/3 of the way up the lake is a little village called Barons River. We stopped to resupply there. Went into the Hudson Bay Company store. And now to the locals up there, it's just the store. But this is a big day for us because Hudson Bay Company has been around for 300 years. They've been a huge part of the history up there. And so we kind of felt like we were connected to things going in here. After Barons River, the lake changes. You lose the rock. You got a bunch of sand, about 30, 40 feet, and then that's a swamp behind you. The next day, the wind had gone down some, but we didn't go anywhere. So we hung out and played football with our spool rope. These are the things you do. I've got this shot for 2 reasons. One is we couldn't believe that Lake Winnipeg gave us a second day like this. I couldn't believe our luck. And the second is that we approached Lake Winnipeg very differently than the rest of the trip. The rest of the trip, when we saw something cool, we stopped and we enjoyed it. Not on Lake Winnipeg. When it let us paddle, we paddled. On this day, I think we paddled for 14 hours and went 50 miles. You can kind of see that in Hank's face in the back. Yeah, we were hungry a lot. Ran into some ice in the upper part of the lake. There were still some little pieces like this floating around and some bigger floes out in the distance. But this is the kind of camp that made it all worthwhile. This is our last day on Lake Winnipeg, and you're facing west, and there is a horizon you just can't believe. It's just so big. It was a nice place. So we made it off Lake Winnipeg, and now we're coming into that village that's 400 miles from the bay, and this is the boat that's coming out of there, heading towards Lake Winnipeg. And that's what we're taking next time. I don't know where to begin here. Cindy can probably fill you in on all the things that happened here, but I'll just leave it at this. One of the first people we met was a Mountie, and we asked him, well, where can we camp? And he said, well, it can get rough around here. You'd better camp on our post. So we're like, okay. And we did. We ended up spending 3 days here due to the weather and got to know these guys really well. Tough duty. It's not first choice duty. Most of them were really young, early in their career. On this particular night, maybe after some whiskey had been consumed, we convinced Mal here to put on the dress reds for us, which they don't wear that. But, you know, that was our image of the Mounties, because, you know, the only thing we knew was Dudley Do-Right. And so that's what we expected to see, and they gave it to us, and we appreciate that. We got to know these guys so well when we left. If you look up here on this collar, they gave us each one of these collar pins, and that meant a lot to us. And they don't have a permanent court up there. If you get into trouble, you wait, and they fly the court to you. Well, that's it. If you get into trouble, these are the people who decide your fate. So, which I'm not so sure about. That's the judge right there. The guy on the end there, that's the court reporter. He takes the notes. Somebody pointed this out to me just a while back. Look at his pocket. How many pens can you have in a pocket detector? He took his job seriously. The guy with his arm around the girl, that's the Crown Attorney. He's the one prosecuting you. And the rest of those guys are Mounties. That's Canada's finest. Great bunch of guys. We had a great time with them. This is why we didn't go anywhere when we were there. That fog in the back, that's not fog. That's wind blowing spray off the waves. I think we had every piece of clothing on that we owned. Oh, here's some more fine gear. Canvas, Converse, tennis shoes. Yeah. You know, that's what all the wilderness magazines recommend. We finally made it out of Norway House, and we're on the last 400 miles there. Can finally catch some fish. Keith's getting us supper. I've got this shot because until this point, except for the very first day of the trip, we've gone downstream. There's a divide that comes up through Minnesota. On one side, it goes to the Mississippi. On the other side, it goes to the Red. We actually started on the Mississippi side, but we crossed that divide right away. And we've been going downstream ever since. But now we've got to jump from one watershed to another. And we've got to go upstream for a little while. But it's low, swampy. You know, the current's not bad. Lots of beaver dams, though. Here Keith is looking at our maps, which overall, not too bad. The maps of Lake Winnipeg were good. They used to run steamships up and down the side of that lake, so those were good. Not every map was great, though. I remember one that said, look for a conspicuous tree. You know, which we didn't deem that real helpful. But we got lucky when we were in Norway House. The Mounties took us over to meet this old conservation officer. And cantankerous old guy. But he actually helped make one of the maps we were using. And so he let us in on some things. Oh, and that's where we recorded the most mosquitoes in one swat, which was 17. Beaver dams. We're almost to the divide, came to this bog, and it was kind of tough finding your way through there. But this is the divide. That water there goes one direction. You go just a little ways the other side, and it goes the other direction. This is a sacred place to the creek. Tough day. Our longest portage was around that, maybe about 1.5 miles. We tried to sail. That's as good as it got. I'm sorry. This is something we did every day. We wrote in our journals. And boy, all of us today say that, we can look at these pictures and it creates an image for us. But if we go back and we read something that wrote, it gives you a whole new perspective. That's how we cooked. Anybody know what this grate is?
Refrigerator.
Very good. Hank still has that. That's the toughest stuff ever built. That's the best grate ever. It's out of, if you didn't hear, see, it's a shelf out of a refrigerator. Here we're starting to get into some of the rapids of the Hayes. And the Hayes, when it comes to a drop, a lot of times it will break into channels. And so the problem is you got to pick a channel. And it might look good here, but you get around the corner, it's not so hot. In this particular shot here, I'm in the front, and you can kind of tell by my posture, I'm not real excited. You can't see it in the photo, but that water's going to go like this, and then it's making a hard left. And Keith's looking back for help. These guys are taking a picture. So they don't care if we die. Keith and I portaged around that, and we recommended that they do the same. Because if they got that canoe stuck in there, it'd still be there. You'd never pull that out. But they made it with 2 inches to spare, and then, oh God, they thought they were kings of the river after that. We had to like bow on every portage or something like that. Some more rapids. In that last 400 miles, except for 3 other canoes and this is the only other sign of man that we saw. And we think this is a seasonal hunting camp, we're not sure. This is a favorite spot. You can see our tents on that dome on the right. Another fun one. Fishing was good. This place is Wappanapanas Falls. This is, and in Cree it means the angling place. At this spot, Rich got tired of pulling out 10-pound northerns. He just said, I'm taking a nap. And he laid down. This one's about 18 pounds. There were lakes there where we could catch northerns every other cast. Literally every other cast. Walleyes maybe take you 5 minutes. This probably was our favorite camp. This is on an island in a big lake. Just had to watch yourself at night. You don't want to be too groggy when you get up.
Oh boy.
There's just things you don't tell Mom. And at some point earlier in the trip, after one of the close calls, Hank sat me down and he said, Ben, he says, you're the keeper aliver. It's your job to make sure we don't die. And so when this idea came up, I'm kind of in the background going, not smart. And as you can see, they listened to me. Now that's supper. Each of us would eat about 2.5 pounds of filleted meat. We ate fish for 30 days. I do not eat fish today. 4th of July, custom is to blow something up. So we put popcorn in the kettle there, let her blow, and then we try to catch it. That's Saturday night in the wilderness. This spot here, this is a great spot. This is only about a day's paddle out of that village that's 200 miles from the base, so we're not far from that village. We spent 3 days here. It was just a great spot. But on the first day, it was weird. This motorboat came to the base of the falls. There's 3 Cree guys in there. And they're obviously going to portage it around. They're laying logs on the ground, and they're going to roll it. Well, our moms taught us, right? We're nice guys. So we go over there and we latch on to the boat, help them get to the other side, and away they go. They came back the next day. We did the same thing, get them to the other side, put the boat down, and one of them turns to the other 2 and says something in Cree, and they all start laughing. And we thought, okay, we did something to amuse these guys. Well, then he turns to us and says, want home brewed? They're bootleggers. It's a dry settlement. They're bootlegging into town, and we're helping them. So we said, well, sure, we'll try some home brew. They got this false bait tank. He ladled some out into a jug and gave it to us. And as the keeper aliver, I wanted to know what we were going to drink. And so I asked him, I said, well, how do you make this? Now, the language was an issue, but here's what he said. He said, warm water, yeast, raisins, 24 hours. That's the recipe for the hooch we were going to drink. It was awful. That's the thought that counted. Got something in the water there, and Rich is cleaning it out for him. You know, sometimes I get to go to schools. It never fails. Some kid will say, "Is he naked?" You know, well, I don't think so, but you know, it's the 70s. We ate well. We would just fill that pot up with some spice, and then we'd use either instant mashed potatoes, rice, or macaroni for both. And that's mashed potato something. You get into a section of the Hayes where there's just rapids after rapids. It's like 44 sets of rapids. And some of them you can run and have fun. Some stuff you got to portage around. And some, and I don't have pictures of this, and I'll apologize, we don't have pictures of a lot of the best stuff because we protected that camera like it was gold. And we had it in a bag, in a bag, in a bag. And you didn't get it out when the big waves or the rapids are giving you a hard time. But there is one point here, I won't tell you the whole story, but just enough to say that Keith and I went out to look at one, and we looked a little too close, and we were gone. It happened to be about the biggest rapids on the river, and that was entertaining. Now that's about a 9-foot drop. We didn't go over that. Yeah, I got nothing. I just keep hearing deliverance in the background. Once you get past the rapids, the Hayes goes fast for the bay. Now, on this day, we probably paddled 7 hours, but went 70 miles. And I got to tell you, I have great respect now for the old fur trippers because they would come back the other way. And you know, we idealized their life, but it had to have been a tough gig coming the other way. You know, roping, poling, whatever. It starts to change. You lose the rock. You got these clay banks. The trees are getting small. They're only about 15 feet tall. Getting closer to the bay. Almost to the bay. And at this point, something really freaky happened. At least it was freaky to us. We're paddling along, and the water started going the other way. Now, we're from Iowa, so we don't understand these things. Our first thought was that you guys nuked the place while we're gone, and that this is what happens. But of course, it's the tide, and they have very severe tides up there, 15, 18 feet. And so when that water comes in, the last 3 miles or so of that river, it goes the other way. It's wrong. This is where we went. This is York Factory. This is a modern picture of the place, but it's nearly identical. That building on the left there is different. There weren't these 2 boardwalks. There's 2 cabins down to the right side off screen. That's it. Even though there isn't much there now, this was a very important place in history. Even though it was out in the middle of nowhere, they could get access to those rivers, though, and come all the way down to Minnesota. And there's been something in this general area since 1680. And at one point, there were 30, 40 buildings here. But then they built a railroad to Winnipeg, so all the trade came south. And this place kind of started to decline. They closed the Hudson Bay Company store permanently in '57, and the place became a National Historic Site in '68. And that building in the middle was built in 1832. That's the Great House. They actually used to conduct trade there. And that building is still there. This is us in front of the Great House. There's a caretaker who was there for about 3 months out of the year, and he branded our paddles with the York Factory brand. It's the brand they used to put on the furs. That was a big thing for us. This is the building that was on the left when we were there. That's barbed wire. That's for the polar bears. Apparently, you don't want the bears to go up there and lean against the window, because if they do and they break it, they get cut, they get mad. And you don't want that. This is in the interior of that big building. There's an open courtyard. And if you follow this around here, that's where somebody dried a polar bear skin. And Keith is 6'9". Yeah, we didn't think that polar bear thing through. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you, we were not prepared to be on Hudson Bay. It can get mean and nasty at any time. And it did. While we were there, we got a sea storm. Lots of rain. It's right at freezing. lots of wind, it'd be slush, rain, slush, and permafrost is only far down, so the water can't go anywhere. It just sits. So we woke up in water, and we were cold. But the caretaker took pity on us, and he let us into that second cabin, which actually had a bottle of propane stove, and they had a generator that they could fire up and do some laundry at times. There's our polar bear, right there. Now, one of the first presentations I ever did, there's a guy in the back, and he's like, well, that's not very close. The heck it ain't. Yeah, if you see a polar bear, you're way too close. Yeah, they're king, and they know it. The story on our bear is I'd gone down to the great house there, and I heard these gunshots. And my first thought was that Doug, we called him Crazy Doug, he was just a little out there. I thought he shot my boys. And I'm like, I'm not going back there. But I finally came back, and what happened was Doug was just driving it off. He drove it over the bank and out into the water. And by the time I got there, you couldn't see the bear. It was too far out. And I was extremely bummed about that. But then it occurred to me that 5 minutes before this picture is taken, I'm sitting right there. So I'm okay not seeing the bear. People ask us, well, did you have a gun along? It's like, no, we had a wrist rocket slingshot. Just enough to tick him off, I'm sure. Yeah, piss off the polar bear. We're waiting for the plane. This plane flew in, took us out a couple 100 miles, strapped 2 canoes below that and all of us inside. Now, I'm not sure about that, but this took us out to God's Lake, where we picked up a supply plane, came in a couple times a week, and this flew us back to Winnipeg. This is how we got home. Now, I have to tell you guys, I'm the world's worst flyer. I hate it. There's nothing worse than being in a plane to me. And so, when that showed up, I'm like, no. I'll wait for winter, I'll walk. Because that looks old to me. But our bush pilot, he said, look, it's a DC-3, it's the most reliable plane ever built. And I'm like, okay, it made me feel better, but I wasn't so sure about our particular plane. Because they got their finger in a hole. Now, I didn't take aeronautical science, but I don't think you're supposed to be able to do that. The longest 3 hours of my life in this airplane right here. This is the last shot I'm going to show you. This is from that first day on Lake Winnipeg. And the 4 of us call this the reason why. To us, this picture kind of shows what it's all about. We didn't go to see how far we could paddle. We didn't go to prove anything to anybody. We just wanted to go see what was out there. And to see the people, to see the land. And to us, that's what an adventure is all about. So,